All right. Hey, everyone. It's Mike Rosell, Engineers for Communities live show. Got a really interesting guest today. I've got Troy Ellison, the CEO of Cloacina, a family owned wastewater treatment efficient solution, super scalable. Troy, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So, just for people who don't know you, can you give me a little bit about your past and then kind of how Cloacina came to be? How did you get there?
Yeah, happy to. So in terms of Cloacina, that came about as a function of our family having been in the operations and maintenance side of the business. And so we have a sister company called Fluid Resource Management based out of California. And, we maintain around 100 wastewater treatment plants and systems all over the state. And in the early 2000s, we were building and installing everybody else's plants. And we just weren't super excited about the quality of them and the operability. And so we sat down as a family and said, we want to give the industry something better. Ultimately, we want to give a better product. And we actually tried originally to go to several of the then more prominent manufacturers, and we asked them to do the same thing. And after sort of getting told, "Oh, aren't you guys cute? The industry isn't looking for that," we said, "Well, to hell with it. We'll do it ourselves." And so that really was the sort of the impetus for Cloacina. So 2007, we started Cloacina. The name, most people sort of ask what is the origins of the name, and it's actually the Roman goddess of wastewater. And so as we were sitting around thinking about what to call ourselves, because we didn't want to sort of drown in the usual noise of aqua, hydro, water that a lot of the other firms use, one of our family members, it's debated heavily which one said it, but one of the family members said, "There's got to be a God we could pray to for the answer." And well, turns out there was. So that's sort of how we came to be.
And that God's been praying well over y'all. Are you guys,
Yeah,
your prayers have been responded to? Sorry.
Our prayers have been answered. Yes.
So in all that, were there some growing pains, some adjustments you had to make, specifically like getting to meeting all these different municipal standards for different states and stuff? What were some of the kind of trials and tribulations?
Yeah, I mean, there was and still continues to be trials, but ultimately there was a lot of growing pains that we had to overcome. And the reason we were able to overcome those is because it really came down to our core principles. We always placed the project and the product over profits, and that's not always the case in the industry. This was super tough in the early years. We had to set ourselves aside from the crowd, and in order to do that, and frankly, we had to lead with pricing. We had to be really appealing so that clients wouldn't say no. And then we sort of shifted that to a different value proposition, which is bringing forward a plant that is of the utmost quality and really is one that is worthy of being compared equally to a traditionally constructed plant.
Something I think that was so interesting there that you mentioned was the pricing, and you started there and no longer there. I feel like pricing is a race to the bottom where no one wins. And can you kind of give me some of the top items that really separate your class versus other specifically prepackaged plants?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. The big thing for us is we're the only manufacturer that I know of in the entire world that actually only builds out of stainless steel. That was something that we made a very conscious decision to do as a family. And we made that decision I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago. And at the end of the day, the reason we made that decision was we actually had a division of our company, FRM, that was a specialty coatings division. And so we had an entire team that did nothing but traveled the state recoating package plants. And so we got to see what a nightmare that was for our clients. Nobody was ever happy having to deal with that. And it was always this side of 10 years that they were having to deal with it. And that was just something that was being sort of swept under the rug. So that's a big thing. Every single thing is built out of stainless steel that we build in terms of package plants. And then the next thing was we made the conscious decision to utilize essentially municipal quality components and equipment. And so that's what I mean in terms of blurring that line between us and a traditionally constructed plant. At the end of the day, really the only difference between us and a constructed plant is where it's built. We build it at our factory beforehand, and then whether the tank is stainless steel or concrete. And so that's been huge for our clients because they don't have to give up the traditional equipment that they're used to. We're using the exact same pieces of equipment. All of the big names we utilize.
What was so interesting too, they can come, you've invited me multiple times. You come walk your plant. You can actually come see it get built. I think that's something you guys are pretty open about and want to bring people to come witness.
Yeah, we strongly encourage that. And it's nice because on the central coast of California, we've got a bunch of plants around us. And we've got, the gorgeous central coast of California, and they get to come see, state of the art factory where we're actually building the plants. And it's great because they can see ones all the way through tank production and into factory acceptance testing. Everything from a 5,000 gallon per day plant up to a 500,000 gallon per day plant is usually on the shop floor at any given time.
Yeah, talking about flow rates, I just reminded me. So, can you explain to me kind of the design values around your plants and how other pre-manufactured plants make huge claims for what they can do and where it really breaks down in the flow rates and their capabilities?
Yeah. So you'll hear a lot of claims from different folks in the industry about what their flow capabilities are, but they're very dodgy about it. And then you actually have semantics games within that where you might say, Mike, oh, I need a 500,000 gallon per day plant. And somebody might disingenuously represent their plant as being a 500,000 gallons per day, but they actually mean peak day flow. And when I say a 500,000 gallons per day, I mean average day flow, peaking up into the 1,000,000 gallons a day. So you have to sort of unpack that and really define what you mean when you say that. But the rest of the plants that are out there, for the most part, they tend to be sort of singular tanks, and occasionally they've got what they call supplemental tankage that they sort of tack things onto it. But it's really sort of hindsight thinking. It's not actually designed with the end goal in mind, which is a singular size range, with flexible applications. So they tend to be more focused on the flow ranges in the like 50 to 100,000 gallons per day, because that's what you can tend to get out of about 1 to 2 tanks. And past that, a lot of the industry vendors out there will say, well, just add 6 of these to get to 1,000,000 gallons a day. And so then you're sitting there going, well, so now am I going to get 12 screens and I'm going to have 20 membranes and, 30 fat, RAS pumps. And so from that end, it just doesn't scale well. Whereas our approach has been to say, we want a 250,000 gallon per day ADF flow plant. Here's what it is. It's a monolithic structure. Here's a 500,000 gallon per day plant. Here's 100,000 and everything in between it.
So that kind of segues into another thought is there's a lot, does this cause some negative connotations with the pre-packaged plants, what they're able to do and what they really stand for? Is this one of the kind of main points in that?
Yeah, so that's probably one of the singular biggest uphill battles that we have as a company, which is what I would call a rightly deserved negative connotation associated with the term package plant. And I'm completely empathetic to those that are of that mindset that a package plant is low buck, interim, short-term solution, low quality. Because frankly, like in my father's day and age, that was true. These were plants that barely had a coating on them. It looked like somebody spray painted them. Blowers were controlled by irrigation timers. There was controls systems were not, commonplace. So I understand why people still have that, and it's usually sort of the older generation holdouts that hold that negative connotation. And what we're trying to do is change that mentality. I think a good analogy is if you go back into the 60s or 70s in the commercial building space, it used to be that before that, any building that was built was a brick and mortar building, and you had an architect and you had an engineer, and they specialized in the design and engineering for a building. Well, the statistics are today that 71% of all commercial buildings are pre-engineered steel buildings. And nobody is saying things like those aren't going to stand the test of time. And there are low buck versions like you can get from Home Depot, but a traditional commercial building will last the exact same amount of time frame. And so you don't have to give up things anymore in terms of when you get a package plant. At least we feel that way.
Well, I think a big key component is it's just because it's not getting built on site doesn't degrade its quality and stuff. It doesn't have to be both.
Well, and actually, I think our goal as Cloacina is that narrative, because to be quite honest, nobody expects Ford to come build your car in your driveway. That's not actually how you get scaled innovation and quality. The way that you get that is by having it built in a factory so that you get all of the benefit of the firm who's engaged actively in producing that number of units, and they're able to do all of the testing there so that when you drive it off the lot, you can have a reasonable assurance that you're going to have the minimized amount of problems.
Yeah, I love, and you have like a billion great car analogies. No, that's a good point. It's super repeatable. It's repeatable. It's like it's on an assembly line. This is how we do it. Bam, bam, bam. And you're obsessing on the efficiencies and how I can make that process and product better. You're not every time having to like redirect your focus and figure out how to custom build this thing.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's tough for I'm completely sympathetic to your guys' position as engineers, where you have to sort of straddle the commercial aspects and contractual requirements, where you have to maintain a degree of impartiality as you're selecting a traditional plant. Well, at the end of the day, what that means is the way that you design it, it may not actually be built that way, because you might intend for specifications to convey one thing, and a contractor is going to make a low dollar decision at the end of the day. So it actually doesn't allow you to perfect your design, because you're having to deal with the illusion of impartiality when you're building out the design.
Yeah, what an example that comes to my mind would be I'm doing a 40 million gallon per day lift station at a wastewater plant, and I got to spec 3 different sets of pumps to go in this thing. And one might be $10,000 more per pump, but it's going to operate 4 times better and last twice as long than the other
Yeah.
2. But because of the state statutes and stuff, I have to spec the other 2 out, and the contractor's probably going to bid one of those in the end.
Yeah. And that's a tough position to be in, and I get it. I've experienced that for decades.
So how would you suggest to navigate that kind of hurdle?
Well, one of the ways that I work with our clients on is building performance specs specifically around the membrane manufacturer as a vendor. And then if they want to have individual conversations about the piece of equipment, I'm happy to do that. At the end of the day, you and I can have a decision or have a conversation about all the pieces of equipment that we utilize. And I don't think you'll find a single exception to anything, because it's all the exact same high-end equipment that you would be putting onto your plant anyways. So I'm not going to Home Depot and picking out pumps. So I think in our particular instance, it's really you guys choose who you want to work with your clients in terms of an actual vendor, produce a selection process to nail that down, and then you're able to get what you want at the end of the day.
No, that makes sense. What's an example of performance-based specs around the membrane? Like, what would that look like?
Well, specifically in terms of the membranes, there's all sorts of criteria that I recommend utilizing, like GFD. So one of the problems is you have to get really deep into the design of the membranes. And one of those things that people try to sort of nefarious characters over the years have tried to push around is the gallons per square foot per day. And essentially, the industry has said, hey, here are some bookends for what those should look like. And then every once in a while, you see people that are trying to jump those up. So that's one example where just hold the line. You don't have to give anything up in that regard. In terms of the total package, there are all sorts of things that you guys can recommend to your client in terms of experience, the general materials of construction, and some of the features. So, I always tell newer clients and engineers, you shouldn't have to take a leap of faith in any regard. If somebody's telling you, oh yeah, we've got this proprietary, thing in our black box, get the hell away from that.
That brings up a good point. So one of the things I've heard you say is it's a good and a bad thing, the barrier to entry into the wastewater world. And this seems like one of those good reasons. Like, you need to be able to show that you and your team, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, have done these kind of projects.
Yeah, it's a real juxtaposition that I've been in our entire existence, because we want to drive innovation and we want to be an innovative company, but not at the risk of the project. And so it's our desires exceed the industry's conservatism. And this is part of a good yin and yang that exists in the industry, frankly. And it's funny because I rail against it on one side, but I also expect to toe the line. And the bottom line is we've all heard the horror stories associated with things like proprietary technologies or people being too aggressive in certain terms of their design. And the reason why there are standards is for that very reason, so that we're not wandering too far off the path. And we've seen over the years from operating and maintaining plants where somebody convinced us that going aggressive on something was a good idea because it saves you a couple of bucks here. At the end of the day, it costs you a lot more than you ever saved. And that's just what we've come to find. And it's why we as a company have become more and more and more conservative every single year in those terms. So where we tend to drive innovation now is the optimization of the equipment and the optimization of the design, not in asking you to take a leap of faith in any of those aspects.
So you're just trying to stay within those guidelines. How can we make either our process to build the product better, or maybe like make some small tweaks to the actual layout of the plant?
That's right. Yep. That coupled with our scale really allows us to bring significant value to the project.
Talking about scale, how big do your plants scale to?
So our base unit, our largest base unit, that's a standard product, is 500,000 gallons per day ADF. And so we're able to now do multi-million gallon per day projects, because what we'll do is we'll break out the headworks, for instance, and we'll break out the UV. And whereas those otherwise would have been just specifically for that size plant, we'll take those and build bigger units of those to serve multiple trains. And then we'll strip out some of the superfluous redundancy and optimize the amount of equipment that we have in each of those. And so we try to take the best of that mentality and leave behind the having 27 screens. Admittedly, the way that we do it leads to having a few more pieces of equipment than you otherwise probably would have in a traditional plant. However, my argument is, even if you have to service a couple more blowers, or you have to deal with a couple more pumps, the millions of dollars that we're saving over the traditional methodology is a pretty good amortization in terms of the maintenance costs. So, really it comes down to what makes the most sense for the projects. But our ceiling really is in the several million gallons per day range now.
Wow. That's like another class of these plants. I don't know if I've really heard anyone doing that.
Yeah, it's a sort of a niche that really hasn't been available because nobody's been willing to step up in terms of their actual value that they bring to the table and scale up their company in terms of production capabilities. Showing the entire nation right now that that can be done on quite a few projects, and I think that's going to continue pushing that way. You look around the nation, and there are master plans sitting out there where, you know, a million gallon per day plant is costing $50 to $75 million, and a 2 million gallon per day plant is costing $75 to $100 million, and it doesn't have to cost that much. You can still get the same high quality MBR treatment with all of the features without spending that much money.
So you're saying that your product in those flow ranges can actually be a cost savings into some of those larger flow rates.
Yeah, we have one project specifically where we're saving the client tens of millions of dollars by swapping out the technology, and we're giving them a higher quality effluent than they otherwise would have received with what that particular master plan had.
Well,
that's pretty meaningful savings.
Yeah. All right. So I just try to think, I'm this client, you've approached me, it sounds great and all. None of my contractors that I have on my short list have ever installed one of these before. They're kind of sitting there like, is it plug and play on their end? Like what would they, how do they integrate with this?
So this is where you have to have sometimes uncomfortable conversations, and it's twofold. One is with the engineers, we have to have the conversation, which is, look, we know that you're going to be getting less fee structures than a traditional project. So if you take like a $50 million project, for instance, maybe the engineer would say, well, our typical fees would be in the 10% range. So 5 million. And if we come on to the scene, they don't need that kind of a fee structure. You could probably cut that in half. And so sometimes that's a difficult pill for the larger engineers to swallow because they're just looking at billable hours and revenue streams. So that's tough. And then the second part is the contractors. Sometimes there's already a contractor that's maybe been selected, or you're having conversations with contractors, and they're going to look at that and go, well, hey, what the heck? That's taken tens of millions of dollars out of our pocket. And so that's what I mean is you have to have some difficult conversations. At the end of the day, if you're just doing what's best for the client, then we tend to win out in those scenarios.
Well, and I liken this conversation. I was talking with a friend this morning, and I said, if you talk to 3 lawyers, they'll all tell you that you need to sue the other person because they're a lawyer and they're going to bring their solution to the table. And that's the hard part, is people get focused in on how they do things, and they're the solution to all things that come across their desk. And I think that's the shift that the engineers and the contractors may need to have, is taking a step back and saying, well, this is actually going to be better cost wise, and it could be a better product for the end user, and happy end users are going to bring you more user. Like you'll still win more work because you're having happier clients.
Yeah, and to your point, you have to ask yourself as a client the one question, which is, if the engineer that you have on your team knew that there was an opportunity to save you, let's just say $1 million, but that $1 million comes out of their fee structure, would they present it to you? And if the answer is no, then you probably don't have the right engineer on your team. And that's where in my opinion, when a client's picking an engineer, they have to pick one that's innovatively principled. And that's what I mean specifically by that. If innovation is going to take dollars out of their pocket, are they willing to share that innovation with you and push that on the project? And unfortunately, the answer is all too often no.
Well, do you think that, yeah, I feel like you're right. With the larger firms, they've got shareholders and such, and all they're trying to do is push profits, and that can really skew your decision making. So would it seem like like a medium size or smaller firm may be the better solution for a client for you to work with a client to like get it through? Because I could see that being a big hurdle.
Yeah, where we have the most success are with the smaller to mid-sized firms. So usually between, say, a 5 to 6 person team, all the way up into the like 50 to 100 is pretty ideal for us. And what we see with that is the smaller firms, they're really able to leverage our capabilities, make them look good, and they're able to actually reach up into projects and do bigger projects than they otherwise would have been able to, because they don't have to hire a process engineer. They don't have to have somebody that does all the design work. They're really just filling in holes and sort of acting more as program managers. And then for the medium-sized firms, what we see a lot of times is it just allows them to do more projects and increase their profit margins at the end of the day. A lot of times they're able to keep the same fee structure, but they're able to optimize their design and decrease the amount of hours that they spend on a project.
Well, and that's a good point to bring up to any firm listening to this, potentially looking at an option is, hey, your velocity, your number of projects you can go through are up. Let's say your price comes down to the 75% of where it was, but if you're putting out twice as many projects, I mean, an engineer should be able to figure this out. I think that's 1.5 times profit, like it essentially, if you're able to increase that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a lot of engineers who are sort of taking the middle of the road, where they look at it the way they used to do it, and maybe they're extending some of those savings to the client, but keeping the rest in terms of efficiency, and it just increases their profit. So instead of maybe running a 20% margin, maybe they're able to run a 25 or 30% margin.
Yeah, it seems like a win all around. How does an engineer how do you guys educate the engineers? Because I mean, you can educate the clients, that's a big one, but a lot of the times they just look at the engineer and they say, what like, I like you, what are we doing? Like, what's the solution here? So how do you get those guys on board?
Yeah, good question. So it kind of depends on the type of engineer. So depending on whether they're, more process oriented, or if they're just a civil type of a firm, that sort of changes the rules of engagement. But the first thing is we educate them. We explain how we do things. We explain to them the typical bookends of our capabilities, where we like to sort of have our scope start and stop. And then we figure out if there's a way to work with them on the project that allows their weaknesses to be bolstered by our capabilities, and then ways for us to sort of dovetail into their strengths and give the client an overall better project. So it really is kind of dependent on the particular engineering firm. We've got hundreds of relationships with firms across the nation, and each one of them we sort of do a little more or a little less that works around them. So some of the firms will say, hey, I want to take care of X. Okay, cool. We're the type of company that's not an all or nothing. We can kind of a la carte things based on their desires.
Meaning, when are you that's from a number of things, I'm guessing, like if you need a piece of equipment kind of moved on a wall, they like to see this by the door or that tucked in the corner. Is that some of the stuff you're talking about as well, or?
So it's several things. One, some of the firms just say, hey, I want you to provide everything from the lift station all the way through the effluent pumping and everything in between. Okay, great, we can do that. Other firms will say things like, you know what, I really love pump station design, so I want to do that. Leave that to me. I'll take it and I'll just get you the delivered wastewater. Some even say, I want to handle the headworks, because maybe they're in a geographic location where it's really important they have a local, factor in there. And then others, they want to be more engaged with the process design. So maybe they've got a process engineering arm, and so they want to throw a couple bucks at that team. And those guys sort of peek under the hood with us, make sure that we're not doing anything that they disagree with. So it's those kinds of negotiations. And my thing is, hey, however we dovetail into your project where everybody can be happy, we're good with.
Gotcha. Really neat. That's really nice. To be able to kind of move around, jive however you need. All right, here's another question I have for you. So the wastewater industry can sometimes be pretty complacent, and I think you guys are on a mission to raise everyone's expectations. I think we've talked about some cute big things about, hey, we can drive costs down, we can drive up better quality. Um, what are some of the things specifically that you think they're too complacent about?
What is the industry complacent about? I think that I think the complacency, the tip of the spear is the engineering firms. And I think there's a couple of things with that. One is they have many firms have just become sort of stamping mills where they take a design that they did 10 years ago and they sort of just stamp it out and change the letterhead. And the problem with that is it makes it so that only the same vendors are ever utilized. They're never highly scrutinized, and nothing's ever optimized. And there's all sorts of good and bad associated with that. Not the least of which is there's typically turnover at these firms, and so the person that was raising the banner is no longer there, and so it sort of just turns into, well, that worked over here, let's do it again. And they don't take lessons learned from the last projects or dozens of projects and apply them to future design, because, and this is where I'm sympathetic to it, at the end of the day, they're worried about things like KPIs such as utilization rate. And who wants to be the engineer who says, I actually need another 100 hours to advance this design? So that's one of the I think sort of underlying reasons with complacency. And I think it's a bit of the if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality. So if it works just good enough that nobody gets a phone call back, then that's fine. And
Yeah.
then here's what you guys as the engineers are straddled with. You have to go out into the market space and you have to figure out which of the pieces of equipment you're working with. So essentially your designs can only be as good as the equipment that's commercially available to you. And so that's where, for me, my goal is to raise the industry's expectations. And my plea to all of my competitors is to raise your expectations and become innovative again. Because if we do that, then it gives you guys a better set of tools. Otherwise, you'll just continue putting whatever the bare minimum is from the industry that we're giving you. So hopefully everybody that's occupying this space sees what we're doing and they want to raise their standards as well. And if they don't, that's fine. Then they'll probably fall by the wayside.
I think you hit on a really strong point to me. You said the engineers get complacent, they use the design before. And I think we live in a day and age where if you're not obsessing over how to make something more efficient, better than last time, whatever, you're going to get left in the dust. And it's just a matter of time before some, I just call it disruptor. I don't, it could be a technology, a person, a company, whatever. A disruptor comes in and the next day you're packing it in because someone kept their eyes open and said, well, all I got to do is get the word out about this and then run it through a bunch of times. This is going to be the new way. I mean, just look at, like, you talk about cars, you talk about Tesla. It was like people kind of joked at them, oh, electric vehicles, whatever. And then now all the major manufacturers are making electric vehicles. I think either, I can't remember if it was Hummer or Lamborghini has an electric vehicle.
Yeah. And the funny thing about Tesla is at first they said, "Oh, aren't you guys cute? Nobody's going to buy your electric cars." And then at some point everybody went, "Crap, everybody's buying that electric car." And the ironic thing is those companies from the outset, it looks like those companies could have done that at any point in time, but it took somebody that's principally innovative to come in and go, this is not good enough. We have to raise our expectations. There's a better way to do it.
Yeah, just like Netflix versus Blockbuster. Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix. They didn't.
Yep.
And Netflix held their ground because they believed they had a superior solution to going and watching program television or like physically going to a store to get what you wanted. They held their ground. And now it's not, It's not when are you watching it, it's what app is that movie on?
That's right. And I think using another car analogy to kind of paint where we're at, the sort of where the industry is at right now is I want you to imagine for a moment that you go back in time and you step into Detroit's design departments where they're designing cars. And I want you to imagine a world where not a single person in that design department ever drove a vehicle. They walked to work every single day. And I want you to imagine the stifling that would have occurred to the industry in terms of advancements. And this is, I think, one of the single biggest problems that we have in the industry, which is there isn't actually a requirement for engineers engaged in wastewater engineer to actually operate a facility or be engaged in the operations of it. And so industry has hampered itself. So we have firms that are filled with individuals who have either rarely visited or even more rarely ever operated or maintained a wastewater treatment plant. And so the problem with that is you don't have any feedback loop. And that, I think, is a real tragedy in the industry. And so what we've set up to do is we've tried to take that voice of the operator into consideration in everything that we do. And my thing, I'm so shocked when you asked about, when I step onto a project, one of the first things I ask people is, okay, why isn't the operator on this call? Why aren't we asking the race car driver how to drive that track? And it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate because a lot of times everybody sort of looks around and they go, well, he doesn't deserve to be at the table, is what they're really saying. And there's various ways they sit here going, well, what do you mean he doesn't deserve to be at the table? If anybody knows what it's going to be like to operate a plant in North Dakota, we're just a bunch of people sitting in a room imagining what it's going to be like. We should probably consider asking the actual race car driver how we should drive it or how we should design that car. And so what we bring to the table is that's the background that our family was raised in. And so every single component of all of our designs has that voice of the operator, in the back of everybody's mind that's involved in our projects. We're asking them, is this operator friendly? Is this maintenance friendly? Would you want to replace this on Christmas morning if you were trying to get back to your family after a call out? And so the benefit that we bring to those teams where they otherwise don't have somebody like that is we now have, operations and maintenance experience on the team by default.
That brings up two really interesting points for me. One, the way most of the industry operates for engineers to continue their education is continue education credits, which you guys can provide and give in a seminar and give them one of those credits. But a lot of those credits don't come from like actual field experience. So like the obligation for them to get better at what they do is very minimal if their company's not pushing it out otherwise. What is the solution? As simple as the engineering firms need to just start taking around their group of process engineers and civils to the different plants and start understanding how this all works together? Like how do they get over that hurdle?
That's only part of it. Some of the things that I think need to happen in the industry are the things that we've tried to adopt internally and require. So for instance, when we finish building a plant before it ever launches, we have what's called a should have built meeting. And essentially it's a debrief after the as-builts are done. And what we do is we say, what should we have done here? What are the problems we found during factory acceptance testing? Was there an issue when we were building it? Did one of our operations team members walk through and go, why are you doing that? So we have a should have built meeting. And I think there should be more should have built meetings in the industry. And then secondly, we have a couple of meetings where with our installation teams and then with the operators, where we bring back any problems that come up during the site acceptance or the actual operation of the plant. And we have an internal design committee. And whether it's a small, teeny little thing or a giant problem, we gather all that data, and every single month we meet together as a group and we say, okay, here's all the things that we heard from the industry for all of our plants, and how are we going to fix those? Because until I never get one of those calls, we haven't reached success.
Have you ever read The Ultimate Sales Machine?
No.
That's so interesting. You said that that's one of their strategies and tactics is essentially doing workshops where essentially creating this notebook of all the things that need to change or be updated, and then we're reviewing it quarterly, and then we're implementing the good ones and the bad ones go to the wayside or whatever. Like essentially we're always evolving.
Yeah, and I'll have to read that. It's a mantra that we internally, and the last year we came up with it, which is essentially we're on the relentless pursuit of the perfect MBR. And it's relentless because we will never reach that point, because every time we think we're at the perfect point for today, tomorrow we go, that was a terrible idea, and here's a better way to do it.
I love that. That's exactly how I try to operate. Okay, so another thing that you brought up, we talked about the operators, and I wanted to talk about operator like competency and what happens when you give an operator something that they can't operate. How do you guys get them up to speed? Because I've just seen it where some of these plants, these operators have never worked before, and it is a rough start, and then that goes into the negative connotation that gets associated with this. How have you guys helped kind of shorten that gap?
Well, I think there's a couple of things about that. One is you hit on a good point, which is the nation is facing an operator shortage, and that's a serious crisis. And we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, the thriving blue collar jobs such as operators are not being looked upon societally like they should be, where we're sort of shoving everybody into the college mill, and we're forgetting that people have to actually support the nation's infrastructure at the end of the day. So one of the things that we've done is we've tried to design the plants to be more O&M friendly. And one of the big ways is we've leveraged automation. And we have technical compensation as a feature of all of the automation and sensory equipment we have. But that's a double-edged sword. And I think you hit on it, where in some instances, people have tried to automate things. They've done a poor job of that. And then it becomes an actual onus on the operator. And they're sitting there staring down the barrel of a Willy Wonka machine that nobody understands. But I believe that it can be, I believe it can be managed and implemented appropriately. And here's, again, a car analogy is back in the old days, you used to have to be able to know how to work on your car to even drive it. So you had to know when you were going up into the mountains, you had to be able to tune your carburetor halfway up that mountain so that it wouldn't spit and sputter because the air fuel mixture has changed. Well, nobody has worried about air fuel mixture since the advent of fuel injection. That's a good example that we're all dealing with every single day in terms of automation. And you're seeing the cars are going in that exact same way. Nobody wonders, when am I going to change my oil? No, it tells you when you need to change your oil. It tells you when your tire pressure is low. So we're having to have less and less qualified drivers. And that's exactly what we're building into our plants. Then the other thing is, not a lot of companies have latched onto the fact that the newer, younger generation, my generation, they don't want to read an O&M manual. They're not going to pick up a 2,000-page manual. We are the generation of, oh, my blender's broken, YouTube how to fix it. And so our company has made hundreds and hundreds of maintenance videos and help aid videos so that when they have a problem, they can just log into our portal and get a video on how to change out the impeller on this blower and that sort of thing. So we're trying to sort of reach down into that younger generation that is going to be picking up the wrenches and will be operating and maintaining the plants, because my father's generation is retiring out. And you're going to get that natural aversion with the older generation, and there's just not much you can do about that. So I think we need to focus on the next generation of operators that are coming in and making their lives easy.
So it's a combination of specialization and an optimization or innovation that has really like allowed uh, it's really allowed that to kind of help, I don't know, become better. How would you say it? Like people, I don't know. Those two things have helped separate the gap, really, between what
Yeah,
that each user of a car needed to know, and I can take it into the shop or whatever, and someone can fix it. I don't need to know how to do air fuel mixture
that's
tweaks.
right.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So,
Yeah,
but
I
I
mean,
understand what you're saying.
and one of the problems that I believe has occurred is in this pursuit of providing a certain degree of automation, a lot of the companies have used really low buck technology and equipment. And so on the surface, they say, oh, yeah, we have all these pieces of sensory equipment. But instead of being $1,000 or a $5,000 sensor, they're a $200 sensor. And so if your fuel tank gauge on your car cut out, once a day, you would have very little confidence in that. But as it is, we use really high quality sensors in fuel tanks. And so everybody has the utmost degree in that. And so I think you can implement automation in a way that is reliable, and then that will garner a sense of trust in it. But right now, unfortunately, the industry has done a less than stellar job at doing that.
I agree, and you make a good point about how you can over automate some things and actually end up creating a more work for yourself, or more confusion, or like this chance for just things not quite to line up right. And when you throw in that older antiquated end user, and you're trying to teach them a whole new, just even a treatment system, you could really throw them through a ringer and set them up for failure.
Yeah, you're right. My father always had a saying that said, if you have one clock in the house, you always know what time it is. If you have two, you never know what time it is. And that happens in our industry. We tend to overcomplicate things. So let's put two clocks in there. Well, which one's right? Which one does it reference? And so you get some of that.
So what advice would you give for the municipalities for selecting their engineers or their treatment plant solutions?
Well, we talked about that for a second in terms of my biggest thing is that clients need to be picking innovatively principled firms, ones that would be willing to tell you if there's a better way to do it, even at the detriment to their revenue stream. That's the overarching problem. If every client did that, then it would force innovation, comfortable innovation within the industry. And then I think they need to do a little more due diligence what the firm's actual capabilities are. A lot of times we just look at how big the firm is, and that's the most comfortable thing to them. So we pick one of the big boys, and yep, I chose one of the big names, and that should be all I have to do. Like I just choose the name and that's it. Well, at the end of the day, we all know that the people are the tip of the spear in those firms, and so
Yeah.
that. I think that needs to be the driver.
Dude, that's a good point. So I have a friend, he's a smaller engineering firm, and he submitted a proposal. His is cheaper because it's just him doing all the work. And he's just as qualified, probably more qualified to deliver the project for that client. And the larger firm came in, offered 3 to 4x what his was, and they just went ahead and chose him, even though it's like, if I know I would definitely be choosing him. I'm gonna get this like very thought out, like created solution, but they just went with big guys because they're big guys, and that's what we do.
Well, it's interesting. I can't remember the actual bill that caused that to happen, but that I believe it was in the 80s. It's either the 70s or the 80s, where a consortium of engineers got together and developed a federally recognized bill that everybody subscribes to. That's why when you have an RFP out for an engineering firm, there's the quals and the price, because they didn't want the little guys to be able to win. And that's a pre-engineered process that benefits specifically the larger firms. They have greater SOQs, and they can be 2 to 3 times X more. And it doesn't matter because you can't even open that second package that has the price until you've.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I don't know if it's federal, or there's a couple states, you're right, that push that down. that you don't even get
Probably
you don't even...
probably time to revisit that mentality.
So I guess I got one more question. I was going to ask you about some of maybe your shining moments, success stories. I don't know which clients you can share kind of that their process. Do you have any good ones to share with us?
Shining moments. Man, it's tough to pick out a singular moment because I'm the kind of person who I value the process of something. So I tend to be goal oriented, but all of the joy for me is in the process. And so when I get to when I get to the end of something, it's like, well, on to the next path. And I guess in terms of singular moments, I think for me, for years, we as a family sort of played, Dr. Frankenstein. And at a point, we flipped the knife switch on and the electrocution flowed through, it energized the entity. And I think for me, it wasn't a singular moment. It was sort of a realization when the monster came to life that we had the and the culture established that was going to allow them to continue taking the original goals and sort of mantra that we had. And it's at the point I think the greatest moment for me in the company was when I came to the realization that I could pass away, any founder could pass away, and the company is going to continue to thrive because we now employ the absolute greatest minds in the industry, absolute best craftsmen, and there's now a team that supports all of them. And so, yeah, I don't think there's a single moment. I think it's just sort of that realization, like, the company can exist on its own laurel. And I am amazed every single day because I am surrounded by people 10 times smarter than I am at what they're doing. I love how they take the vision and they run 10 times further than I ever could have. And so for me, that's the absolute best part, coming in every day.
Yeah, so it started out as a family affair and then it became bigger than that. And that's when you're like, wow, we're really doing something here.
Yeah. And I mean, it's incredible. I am blown away every single day, the advancements that we're making on every single front. And it used to be we could only advance as quick as I could move things around, and now it's out of control and I'm amazed at it.
Troy, where's the best spot for someone to reach out to Cloacina or yourself?
So the best spot is go on the website, www.cloacina.com. There's a couple of ways to get in contact with us from the website. You will have somebody that instantly responds to you with fervor and can answer any questions. We have an unbelievable sales team that supports all the front end. And so, yeah, if anybody's got projects, we'd be happy to work through it. Don't assume that anything's too small or too large for us. We'll let you know if we have a good fit.
Awesome. Troy, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story, Cloacina's story, and your kind of take on the industry and where it needs to go. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Enjoyed it, Mike.
All right. Take care.